Welcome back to the Rogue Wave podcast. We do this when there's some comic book news that's out there in the mainstream that we want to talk about. That'll give you the inside info on what is to come on the big and small screen. We call this Spinning the Racks.
Spin the rack, spin that rack.
All right, Inferno will be Jonathan Hickman's final run for now on the X-Men.
You see what we're talking about innovation, though? Why are they're rebooting Inferno? Inferno was a comic book event when I was a kid.
Yeah.
What are you doing, guys?
Okay, yes.
I'm sure the new take with the new X-Men.
Right.
I'm sure it's going to be a tour de force. I'm not doom scrolling it, but why?
Well,
when you're doing a reboot of not comic books themselves, but of the events that took place in comic books, it's like Star Trek doing Wrath of Khan again with J.J. Abrams. Like, why? There's nothing you needed to do to improve on what had come before. You may be right that we are in some serious trouble.
Well, I'll sit there and tell you, rebranding things that have come before and delivering them in a different way is kind of cool. I don't have as much an objection to it anymore as I used to, just because, I mean, look, like you said, Inferno was when you were a kid. That was 40 years ago when Inferno came out.
I mean,
so,
yeah, but in the same sense ago. In the same sense of what you were talking, yeah, not 40 years ago, dude. Stop it. But I mean, in the same sense of what you were talking about, if you're not being new, if you're not being innovative, then yeah, you're going to be bowled over by people who are doing it in a bigger, better, brighter way. Yeah. And I mean, you're talking about like, what if is on television? What would you rather watch?
Right.
Would you rather watch What If or read a reboot of an old, graphic novel that was done in the 80s? You know, come on.
No,
and it was
I agree
a
with
great
that.
one.
The part that gets me upset about this, though, too, is the fact that Hickman's basically saying, like, Hickman was brought in to reboot the line. He did that very effectively. I thought House of X and Powers of 10 were excellent.
He's done so admirable.
Then, I got to be honest with you. I mean, we're 2 years into this. It's grown stagnant. I don't like that the X-Men are omnipotent. And then he comes in and says something like this. He says, however, I also knew that what I was cooking with dynamite. And it was very possible that what I had written in House of X and the ideas contained within was not actually the first act of a 3-act story, but something that resonated more deeply and worked more like giant-size X-Men, where it would represent a paradigm shift in the entire line for a prolonged period of time. During the pandemic, when the time came for me to start pointing things toward writing the second act, I asked everyone, he talks about his other writers who he brought into the X-Men line to write these books, if they were ready for me to do that. And to a man, everyone wanted to stay in the first act. It was really interesting because I appreciated that House of X resonated with them to the extent that it did. They didn't want it to end, but the reality was that I knew I would be leaving the line early. So he has set this 3-act course that he's now not going to fulfill. What made House of X and Powers of 10 very invigorating to me is that it felt as if it was going somewhere and actually was part of a larger story. And it's kind of grown a little tiresome. I don't want the X-Men to be... look, they can't die. What's the point? If you can't die, what's the point? If you can basically just do everything that you want to do, like they can regrow themselves. This recent issue of X-Men I read, Mystique's like, I want a bomb, so she goes to Forge. Now, Forge's mutant ability is to invent anything he wants, right? And he puts his mind to it. I get it. Claremont used to write him, though, in a way where it was an ordeal. It wasn't like, turn the page. He just invented a black hole generator, overnight. It's the same problem I had with, like, Avengers Endgame, where Tony Stark is like, well, time travel doesn't exist. Give me some coffee. One sip later, I know how time travel exists because we need it to. It's lazy writing. And to me, the fact that all of the other writers now don't want to move on from this, Island of Krakoa, storyline, and I'm not saying they have to move on. I'm just saying that it's basically you're stuck. You're stuck in this point where I'm sitting there saying I don't understand. You know, the most interesting book to me right now is Wolverine because he's fighting vampires, and I'm even part of me is like, when does Wolverine fight vampires? Maybe that's why I like it. Maybe that's why I think it's cool. It's just I don't get to see this often, and they're doing something a little different at least. Every issue, it's the same thing. Kitty Pryde is just prancing around saying, you know, how great she is and how amazing she is, and that's in Marauders. Excalibur gave us this otherworldly stuff, and that kind of worked into the Sword of X, or X of Swords crossover, which was, look, I actually appreciated it. I liked the tournament idea of it because they actually removed the death part of it when you read it. Like you could die over there, and they might not be able to resurrect you. So they were, you know, there was a little bit of trepidation there.
Yeah.
But again, all this kind of stuff is happening, and now Hickman's leaving, so we're going to be back to the status quo again. Like it's just, this goes back to my earlier point. I think like the big two are in trouble. They're not producing books. They're not producing stories that have any kind of impact whatsoever.
Because nobody's reading anymore, man. I mean, everybody who is doing comics now. I mean, I don't judge. This is a completely unsubstantiated generalization, right? But I mean,
I wish you would do more of those.
No. Everyone seems to who's doing comics now seems to have learned to read from comic books.
Yeah,
you know. So it's just like the old days when I was in art school. And they were like, don't learn to draw from comic books.
Yep.
You know, you got to learn everything. You have to learn your anatomy. You have to learn your perspective. You have to learn your you know, establishing shots, vanishing shots, this kind of stuff. You have to learn them in the context of sequential storytelling before you go into comic books. You know, you can't learn them from comic books. Now, there is stuff to be learned from comic books, but the basics of storytelling and either visually or literally, you should not use those as a basis of information for yourself. So, like, you know, the comic book people who were making comics when you and I were growing up were well read. They read like Asimov. They read, I mean, like they read giants in the and they read actual books. They read stories.
And Hickman does that. I mean, you could tell because Hickman's writing is at a higher level. I don't disagree.
Yeah, but
with that.
I'm just saying, like, if people are like, well, why should we leave here without without them? But then on the other side of it, Hickman's idea is a little naive because comic books are predicated on the ongoing system. They're like soap operas.
Yes.
So there shouldn't be 3 acts. You shouldn't have a 3-act structure because that will spell the eventual end of whatever you're doing, and that's not part. That's a more recent aspect of the format because they used to, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, we got up to X-Men like 241 before we started like actually, you know, altering things to a point where, you know, and that's because the stories were becoming. I mean, they were up to X-Men like 250 or whatever before I was 15 years old.
Yeah.
You know, this stuff has been around for quite a long time.
Now let me ask you a question here.
There may not be any place to take these things anymore.
And my answer is probably going to be, let me just think how I'm going to phrase this. Is it going to be the former or the latter? It is going to be the latter. I'm going to say it's the latter of this next statement. Hickman is now credited with reinvigorating the X-Men, right? And he did. The Moore McTaggart thing, I think, was respectful of what came before, using continuity, and did start something new and fresh. Okay. That being said, was it Hickman that reinvigorated the X-Men line or the fact that Disney bought Fox? Because quite frankly, prior to this, the X-Men were marginalized by their own company so much that...
Well, wait a minute. Wasn't Powers of X? Wasn't that all before?
No. 2019.
Yeah, but I mean... Yeah, weren't they happening simultaneous with it?
Yeah, why do you think that is? I wonder. I wonder why there was an attention paid to the X-Men books that hadn't been paid in a while, and an emphasis on them in the marketing.
All right. Okay.
It did happen simultaneously, but it was also something we were talking about as early as 2017 The fact that Disney could buy Fox, that Fox was in trouble and was selling off assets in general and stuff like that. I mean, it was out there for a while, but it wasn't until, like you said, simultaneously, it's as if they knew something was going to happen, and Hickman's now being brought on to revitalize it. And he did, like I said, again, the Moore McTaggart twist was a significant twist, and it was also something that, again, I think could be slid into any of the continuity that had come before, and it fits, and maybe I'm sure there's some stuff that didn't fit, but in terms of the grandeur of scope and things like that, it was a brilliant decision for me, right? I thought it was a brilliant decision. That being said, I think at any point where Marvel as the company would not choose to marginalize their own characters in order to, I mean, what's an Inhuman? Can you tell me what an Inhuman is now? Because they don't care. They don't matter anymore. The Inhumans don't matter because they got X-Men back. They got mutants back. That's what reinvigorated the X-Men line. Them buying Fox. They don't buy Fox. They don't. That's not a. It's not. Just isn't.
All right. I mean, okay. So that happened, We wouldn't be getting more Star Wars if Disney didn't buy Star Wars, So, I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean it's dead. It's just... I mean, I don't get your... All right.
No, my question is, do you think Hickman really revitalized X-Men, or do you think it's Disney that actually did? And I would say it's Disney.
I mean, you gotta give the credit to the person who did it, right? You can't say that, because we don't know that. I mean, that's a choice that you make, but you got to know you're making that choice.
But here's the other thing too, right? I thought Cullen Bunn had a run on X-Men in 2017, which I thought was great, and it brought back Inferno Storm. So it was actually like a multi-dimensional, like time traveling kind of thing, and they actually brought back. So they actually paid homage. I thought his run fit nicely into the continuity of what had come before, and and felt like my X-Men comics again. And everyone said, "Oh yeah, that X-Men." A, they wiped it from continuity, and B, everyone kind of glorifies the Hickman run as like, well, it was the return to form, and this and that. I'm like, no, Cullen Bunn's run was great. Marvel just didn't care about it and decided to put lousy artists on it, and also never hyped up anything about it, and marginalized their own material. So,
well, okay, so then that's the better question: is the revitalization part of marketing versus is it part of is it Hickman's work?
It's
if they put some weight behind it, they put some marketing behind it. Then, I guess so.
And I think they only did that because they own the
it's arguable that the previous work didn't resonate, even though you loved it. You know, I don't know. That's a hot take. I have no idea. I have no idea.
What do you guys think? Did actually? I mean, does it all come down to Hickman, or is it actually? And again, I don't want to take credit away from him. I love his story, but I thought Cullen Bunn's story 2 years prior was just as good and could have been a reboot of the X-Men just as easily as his reboot.
It wasn't.
Happened.
I mean, what we know for certain is that it wasn't.
Yeah.
I don't know.
All right. Well, next week we'll be doing this again. I'm sure there'll be some news that come up. In a couple weeks, we'll be doing Shang-Chi. We've got some big Rogue Matter stuff happening behind the scenes, so that's going to be pretty exciting. We will see you guys next week. Rogue Wave.